Hi, I'm Will Bangura, certified canine behaviorist with Phoenix Dog Training. Got a quick message for everybody. If you've been told that your dog needs to be corrected, shocked, or held accountable for barking, lunging, growling, snapping, panicking when left alone, guarding food, or reacting to other dogs, I want you to pause for a second because the biggest confusion that I see, and it's everywhere, is that people are calling obedience training and corrections behavior modification. And those are not the same thing, not even close. Behavior modification is not just making the behavior stop. Behavior modification is changing why the behavior is happening in the first place. That's the whole point. So let me put this in plain language. If your dog sees another dog and loses it, whether they're on leash, whether they're off leash, maybe they're barking, lunging, growling, what you're looking at is the outward behavior. That is what you can see. But there's always something underneath that behavior that's driving that: fear, anxiety, frustration, conflict, sometimes pain or discomfort, sometimes a history of bad experiences, sometimes a dog who has learned that other dogs predict something unpleasant. That underlying emotional response is what powers that behavior. If you only attack the outward behavior and you never change what the dog feels about the trigger, you haven't modified the behavior. You've only suppressed it. And suppression is a word that pet parents almost never hear. So let me explain it clearly. Suppression is when the dog looks better on the outside, but nothing has been resolved on the inside. The fear is still there. The anxiety is still there. The dog is still overwhelmed. You just taught the dog that they can't express that. That is why I always say you have to be really careful with the word correction. Correction sounds like you're fixing something, like you're correcting a spelling mistake. But in the real world, correction is usually just punishment with better marketing. And here's the problem with punishment: punishment in behavior cases might stop a behavior. Absolutely. It can reduce barking, reduce lunging, reduce growling, reduce snapping. But stopping a behavior is not the same thing as changing a behavior, because the emotional engine can still be running full speed under the surface. Now, I'm going to give you a real example. Let's say that you have a dog. Let's say that you have a dog who is dog reactive on walks. So you're out there, another dog appears, your dog stiffens, your dog barks, your dog lunges. You take an electronic collar or a prong collar or a leash correction and you punish the explosion. The dog quiets down. And the trainer says, "See, it worked. We modified the behavior." No, you didn't. You suppressed the symptoms. Because in that moment, what did the dog actually learn? This is the part most people don't understand. Dogs are association machines. They learn what predicts what. They don't just learn, "I barked, so I got corrected." They also learn what was happening in the environment right before the correction happened. So if the correction happened when another dog appears, the dog can very easily learn something like this: other dogs predict pain. Other dogs predict discomfort. Other dogs predict something bad. And if the dog already thought other dogs were scary, now you have made other dogs even more scary, because now dogs don't just bring fear, dogs bring pain. Dogs bring corrections. That is not behavior modification. That is making the underlying problem worse through association. So now, over time, what happens? At first, the dog might look better, quieter, less dramatic, but inside you're building a pressure cooker because the fear is still there. The anxiety is still there. The dog is still struggling. The dog is just not allowed to show you. And when you have a dog living in that pressure cooker, it becomes unstable. It becomes unpredictable because you're not changing the emotional response. You're just clamping the lid down. This is where things can get dangerous. And I need pet parents to hear this clearly. If you punish growling, maybe you call it correcting. If you correct growling, you can get less growling. That's true. But growling is communication, it's information, it's a warning. If you punish the warning and the fear remains, you don't get a safer dog. You often get a dog that learns to skip that warning. And that means the dog may learn to bite without growling first. The dog may learn to bite without warning. That's not an opinion. That's a known risk. And it is one of the reasons why major veterinary behavior guidance warns that punishment can suppress warning signals while leaving the emotional state unchanged. So if somebody tells you, I corrected the growl, what I hear is, I removed the smoke alarm, but I did nothing about the fire. Now, let's talk about what real behavior modification actually looks like, because I don't want you walking away thinking I'm just criticizing. I want you to understand what to look for. Real behavior modification starts with a clear definition of the behavior, not labels, not he's dominant, not he's stubborn, not he's trying to control you. It's observable, specific. What does the dog do? When does it happen? What triggers it? Then we look at function. What is the behavior accomplishing for the dog? Does barking and lunging create distance? Does growling make hands go away? Does snapping end pressure? Does guarding keep people away from food? Because if you don't understand what the behavior is doing for the dog, you can't build an effective plan. Then comes management. And pet parents misunderstand this all the time. Management is not giving in. Management is how we stop the dog from rehearsing the problem over and over while we teach new skills and change emotional learning. Rehearsal is practice. Practice strengthens behavior. So we prevent unnecessary explosions while learning is happening. Then we teach replacement behaviors. This is huge. If you punish a behavior, but you never teach the dog what to do instead, you're leaving the dog with a vacuum. You're basically telling them, don't do that, while giving them no solution for how to cope. So we teach functional alternatives. That might be orientating to the handler, moving behind the handler, a station behavior, a U-turn. Might be a pattern game, a hand target, a structured sniffing task, something the dog can actually do in the real world when the trigger appears. And here's the heart of it. We change the dog's emotional association with the trigger. If the dog is afraid of other dogs, we do controlled exposure at a distance where the dog can still think. We pair that exposure with something the dog genuinely values. And we repeat those experiences in a way that changes what the trigger predicts. Over time, the dog goes from dogs are scary to dogs predict safety and good outcomes. That is behavior modification. Now, I want to show you two quick visuals because they make this easy. First is the iceberg. What you see above the water is barking, lunging, growling, snapping. That is the stuff people try to shut down. But under the water is the real driver, the conditioned emotional response, the negative predictions, the learning history, the stress load, the lack of coping skills. If you don't change what's under the surface, the iceberg doesn't go away. You just hide it. Second is the pressure cooker. Suppression is the pressure cooker. The dog looks calmer outside, but inside the fear and anxiety are building. Warning signals fade, and the risk of a bigger explosion rises. Real behavior modification releases pressure because you are changing emotions and teaching skills, not clamping the lid down with corrections. And that brings me to the simplest way that I can say this. If a plan is mostly corrections, it's usually just suppression. If a plan changes the setup, changes consequences, teaches a functional alternative behavior, and changes the dog's emotional response over time, that is behavior modification. So if you're a pet parent looking for help, here are the questions that I want you to ask any trainer or any behavior professional before you hire them. Ask them to define behavior modification in plain language. If they can't, well, that tells you something. Ask what they think triggers the behavior. Ask what they think maintains it. Ask how they will keep your dog under threshold while learning happens. Ask what they will teach your dog to do instead. Ask how they will change what your dog feels about the trigger. And ask whether they use punishment, negative reinforcement, shock collars, prong collars, or choke chains. If they do, ask how they prevent suppression of warning signals and how they protect the relationship between you and your dog. Because your dog doesn't need pain to learn. Your dog needs a plan. Your dog needs skill building. Your dog needs emotional change. Your dog needs safety and clarity. And if you want a real rule of thumb that you can take with you, here it is. If it looks like progress, but your dog is more tense, more shut down, less expressive, or more explosive later on down the road, it wasn't behavior modification, it was suppression. Real behavior modification makes the dog feel safer, behave safer, and trust you more, not less.